Sarah Martinez stepped off the military transport bus at Camp Pendleton, her worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The California sun beat down mercilessly as she surveyed the sprawling training facility that would be her home for the next several months. At 22 years old and barely 5'4" tall, she looked more like a college student than someone about to attempt one of the military's most grueling training programs. The whispers started immediately. Other recruits, mostly men who towered over her, exchanged glances and smirked. She could hear fragments of their conversations carried on the hot desert wind. "She won't last a week," one said. "What's a girl like that doing here?" asked another. Sarah kept her eyes forward and her jaw set. She had heard it all before. Growing up in a small Texas town, Sarah had always been the odd one out. While other girls her age were trying out for cheerleading or planning prom dresses, she was fixing cars in her father's garage and running marathons before school. Her father, a former Marine himself, had taught her that strength wasn't just about muscle mass. It was about determination, mental toughness, and the refusal to quit when everyone expected you to fail. The training facility buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of recruits gathered for orientation. Sarah found herself assigned to Platoon Charlie, a mixed group of hopefuls from across the country. Most had impressive athletic backgrounds, former college football players, wrestlers, track stars. They looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and pity, as if she were a lost child who had wandered into the wrong place. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, a barrel-chested man with scars crisscrossing his forearms, addressed the group with a voice that could cut through steel. "Look around you," he barked. 80% of you will not be here in 3 months. This program will break you down to your core and rebuild you into something stronger. If you think you know what tough means, forget it. You know nothing. His eyes swept across the formation and lingered on Sarah for a moment longer than the others. She met his gaze without flinching, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She had worked 2 jobs for 3 years to save enough money to attempt this training. Every dollar earned cleaning offices at night and serving tables during the day had brought her one step closer to this moment. The first few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, medical examinations, and equipment distribution. Sarah received the same gear as everyone else, though some items seemed comically oversized on her small frame. The other recruits continued their barely concealed mockery. During mealtimes, she often sat alone, listening to conversations about how quickly she would wash out. "I give her 2 weeks," said Marcus Thompson, a former college linebacker from Alabama who stood 6'5" and weighed 260 pounds. "First time we do a real workout, she'll be crying for her mommy." The table erupted in laughter, but Sarah simply continued eating her meal, using their underestimation as fuel for the fire burning inside her. The real testing began on day 5, with the initial physical fitness assessment. As dawn broke over the base, the recruits assembled in their physical training uniforms. The test consisted of push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a timed 2-mile run. Sarah watched as several of the bigger men struggled with the cardiovascular portions, their size becoming a disadvantage rather than an asset. When her turn came for pull-ups, several recruits stopped their own exercises to watch. The bar seemed impossibly high above her head, and her hands barely wrapped around the thick metal. But as she began to pull herself up, something remarkable happened. Her form was perfect, her breathing controlled, and her movements fluid. She completed 15 pull-ups, while men twice her size managed only 8 or 9. The running portion revealed even more surprises. While others huffed and stumbled around the track, Sarah moved with the grace of a gazelle. Her stride was efficient, her breathing steady, and her pace consistent. She finished the 2-mile run in 13 minutes and 20 seconds, beating 90% of her male counterparts. Sergeant Rodriguez recorded her scores without comment, but she caught something that might have been approval in his weathered expression. The other recruits were less subtle in their shock. Marcus Thompson, who had barely finished the run within the time limit, stared at her with newfound respect mixed with embarrassment. "Beginner's luck," muttered James Patterson, a former Marine reservist who had expected to dominate the training. "Wait until we get to the real stuff." But doubt had crept into his voice, and Sarah noticed several other recruits looking at her differently. That evening, as she cleaned her equipment in the barracks, Sarah overheard a conversation between two instructors outside her window. "The Martinez girl surprised everyone today," said one. "Her scores were impressive, but this is just the beginning. Wait until we start the combat scenarios and team exercises. That's where the real challenges begin." "Don't underestimate her," replied the other voice, which she recognized as belonging to Sergeant Rodriguez. "I've seen that look in her eyes before. She's got something most of these others don't. Time will tell if it's enough." Sarah smiled to herself as she polished her boots to a mirror shine. Let them doubt her. Let them think today was a fluke. She had spent years preparing for this moment, not just physically, but mentally. While they saw a small woman who didn't belong, she saw an opportunity to prove that heart and determination could overcome any physical disadvantage. The next morning brought rumors of an upcoming field exercise that would test not just individual performance, but team leadership and tactical thinking. It would be the first real challenge where her size and gender would be scrutinized under pressure. As she laced up her combat boots and prepared for another day of proving herself, Sarah felt a familiar surge of excitement. She had come too far to be intimidated by whispers and sideways glances. Every doubt they expressed, every limitation they tried to place on her, only made her more determined to succeed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to show them what they had missed when they judged her by her appearance alone. The sun rose over Camp Pendleton once again, and Sarah Martinez was ready for whatever came next. 3 weeks into training, the atmosphere at Camp Pendleton had shifted dramatically. Sarah Martinez was no longer the forgotten recruit sitting alone at meals. Word of her performance had spread throughout the base, creating a buzz that made some instructors take notice and others shake their heads in disbelief. The morning arrived gray and cold, with fog rolling in from the Pacific Ocean. Sergeant Rodriguez stood before Platoon Charlie, his expression more serious than usual. Behind him, trucks loaded with gear and equipment waited ominously. "Today you begin Operation Iron Wolf," he announced. "This is a 3-day field exercise that will test everything you think you've learned. You'll be divided into teams and given objectives that must be completed under combat conditions." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as Rodriguez began reading team assignments. She found herself grouped with Marcus Thompson, the massive linebacker who had once predicted her quick failure, along with 3 other recruits: David Chen, a quiet but skilled former Army reservist; Jake Williams, a cocky ex-police officer from Detroit; and Tommy Rodriguez, a young Marine from New Mexico who rarely spoke above a whisper. Marcus looked at their team composition and frowned. In his mind, he was clearly the natural leader, with his size and college football experience making him the obvious choice. Jake Williams seemed to share this assumption, immediately deferring to Marcus as they gathered their equipment. Sarah said nothing, simply checking her gear methodically while observing the group dynamics. The first objective seemed straightforward: navigate through 15 miles of rough terrain to establish a forward observation post by nightfall. Each team member carried 60 pounds of equipment, and the route included river crossings, steep climbs, and dense forest sections designed to exhaust even the strongest recruits. Marcus took the lead immediately, setting a pace that he was confident would showcase his superior fitness. For the first hour, his strategy seemed sound. His long stride ate up ground quickly, and he maintained his position at the front of the group with apparent ease. Jake Williams stayed close behind, occasionally offering encouragement and tactical suggestions that Marcus accepted with the air of a quarterback calling plays. However, as the miles accumulated and the terrain became more challenging, cracks began to show in Marcus's leadership. His pace, while impressive initially, proved unsustainable. By the third hour, sweat poured down his face, and his breathing had become labored. The 60-pound pack that had seemed manageable at the start now felt like it was crushing his shoulders. Sarah, meanwhile, moved with the same steady rhythm she had maintained from the beginning. Her smaller stature actually became an advantage in the dense underbrush, allowing her to navigate obstacles that forced the larger men to expend extra energy fighting through branches and tight spaces. She carried her pack as if it contained feathers rather than equipment and supplies. When they reached their first major obstacle, a swollen creek running fast with recent rainfall, Marcus's limitations became apparent. The crossing required careful planning and precise execution. The water was chest-deep and moving fast enough to knock a person off their feet. Several other teams had already attempted crossings with limited success, and 2 recruits had been pulled from the water after being swept downstream. Marcus stood at the water's edge, clearly uncertain how to proceed. His size, which had been an asset on flat ground, now worked against him. The current would hit him with tremendous force, and his top-heavy build made maintaining balance treacherous. Jake Williams offered several suggestions, but none addressed the fundamental physics problem they faced. Sarah studied the crossing for several minutes, noting the current patterns, the depth variations, and the positioning of rocks that could serve as anchor points. Finally, she spoke up. "There's a better way," she said quietly. "If we cross at an angle about 50 meters upstream, we can use the current to help us rather than fight against it." Marcus bristled at the suggestion. "I've got this handled," he snapped. "We go straight across here, stay together, and push through." But as he stepped into the water, the current immediately proved more powerful than he had anticipated. Within seconds, he was struggling to maintain his footing, his pack pulling him backward as the water reached his chest. Sarah watched for a moment, then made a decision that would change the dynamic of their team forever. Without waiting for permission or debate, she moved to the upstream position she had identified. Her crossing was a masterpiece of technique over brute force. She moved at an angle that used the current's energy to propel her forward rather than fighting against it directly. Her lower center of gravity gave her stability, and her lighter weight meant the current had less mass to push around. She reached the far side in half the time it would have taken using Marcus's direct approach, then immediately set up a rope system to assist the others. One by one, she guided each team member across, using her technique and her secure anchor point. Marcus was the last to cross, his pride clearly wounded, but his respect for Sarah's tactical thinking undeniable. David Chen, who had remained quiet throughout the leadership struggle, was the first to acknowledge what had just happened. "That was brilliant navigation, Sarah," he said, as they reorganized their gear on the far side. "You probably saved us 2 hours and kept everyone safe." Tommy Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. "I never would have thought of using the current like that. That's some serious tactical thinking." Even Jake Williams, who had been firmly in Marcus's camp, looked at Sarah with newfound appreciation. The remainder of the day brought additional challenges that further highlighted Sarah's unique strengths. When they needed to scale a steep rock face, her climbing experience and technique allowed her to establish secure routes for the heavier team members. When they had to navigate through a section of dense forest in near darkness, her patience and methodical approach kept them on course while other teams became lost. By the time they established their observation post as the sun set behind the mountains, the team dynamic had completely transformed. Marcus, to his credit, recognized what had happened and made a decision that showed maturity beyond his years. As they set up their defensive positions for the night, he approached Sarah directly. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice carrying none of its earlier bravado. "I let my ego get in the way of good leadership. You've saved our mission twice today, and I was too stubborn to see it." He paused, looking out at the darkening landscape. "From now on, I think we should make decisions as a team with input from everyone. Your tactical sense is better than mine." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she had allowed herself since arriving at Camp Pendleton. "We all have different strengths, Marcus. Your endurance and determination got us through some tough sections too. The best teams figure out how to use everyone's abilities." As the stars began to appear overhead and they settled in for their watch rotation, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving at the base. She felt like she belonged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she was part of a team that respected her contributions. The radio crackled with check-ins from other teams, many of whom were still struggling to reach their objectives or had gotten lost in the darkness. Team Charlie reported their successful arrival in defensive positions, their voices confident and unified. Phase 1 of Operation Iron Wolf was complete, but Sarah knew the real tests were yet to come. Dawn on the second day of Operation Iron Wolf brought an ominous change in the weather. Dark clouds gathered over the mountains as Team Charlie prepared for their next objective, a simulated rescue mission in hostile territory. Sarah woke before the others, as had become her habit, and studied the tactical briefing by flashlight while her teammates slept. The mission parameters were complex and dangerous. Intelligence reports indicated that a downed pilot was trapped in a canyon 12 miles from their current position. The route would take them through terrain controlled by opposing force instructors, playing the role of enemy combatants. These instructors were experienced special operations veterans who took pride in making life difficult for recruits attempting to prove themselves. Sergeant Rodriguez had delivered the briefing with particular emphasis on the challenges they would face. "The opposing force has been given permission to use full contact training methods," he had warned. "You will face live ammunition exercises, smoke grenades, and psychological warfare tactics. Teams that fail to adapt quickly will find themselves eliminated from the program entirely." As her teammates stirred awake, Sarah shared her analysis of the route and potential obstacles. She had identified 3 possible approaches to the target area, each with distinct advantages and risks. Marcus, who had genuinely embraced collaborative leadership after the previous day's lessons, listened carefully to her assessment. "The direct route is fastest, but puts us in open terrain where we'll be exposed," Sarah explained, pointing to her hand-drawn map. "The northern approach offers more cover, but requires technical climbing that could slow us down. The southern route is longer, but uses natural concealment almost the entire way." David Chen studied the map thoughtfully. "What's your recommendation?" he asked. It was a question that would have been directed to Marcus just 24 hours earlier, but the team dynamics had evolved beyond simple assumptions about leadership based on physical size. "I think we take the southern route but modify it here," Sarah said, indicating a section where the path curved unnecessarily. "If we cut through this ravine, we can save 40 minutes while maintaining concealment. The risk is that if we encounter opposition in the ravine, we'll have limited escape routes." Jake Williams nodded approvingly. "It's a calculated risk, but the time savings could be crucial. If this were a real rescue mission, every minute could mean the difference between life and death for the pilot." They packed their equipment in tactical order, with Sarah carrying additional medical supplies since her performance had earned her the unofficial role of team medic. Each team member now carried specialized gear that played to their individual strengths, a division of labor that had emerged naturally from their first day's experiences. The southern route initially proved successful. They moved through dense forest with Sarah navigating point position. Her smaller size and quiet movement made her ideal for detecting potential threats before the team committed to dangerous ground. For the first 3 hours, they encountered no opposition and made excellent time through the challenging terrain. The first sign of trouble came as they approached the ravine Sarah had identified as their shortcut. David Chen, who was monitoring their radio communications, picked up encrypted chatter that suggested opposing force units were active in their immediate area. The team took cover behind a fallen tree trunk, while Sarah moved forward to reconnoiter the ravine entrance. What she discovered changed everything. The ravine was not undefended as their intelligence had suggested. Instead, it had been turned into a carefully prepared ambush site. She could see at least 3 camouflaged positions with instructors playing enemy combatants, and there were likely more that remained hidden. The ambush was sophisticated, designed to catch teams exactly where she had planned to take her group. She crawled back to the team position and shared her findings. "It's a trap," she whispered. "They've turned our shortcut into a killing field. If we go in there, we'll be eliminated within minutes." Marcus's immediate instinct was to find another route, but time was becoming critical. Other teams were also moving toward the rescue objective, and arriving late could mean failing the mission entirely. Jake Williams suggested a frontal assault, using their superior numbers and firepower to overwhelm the ambush positions. Sarah studied the terrain for several more minutes, then proposed something that seemed impossible. "What if we don't avoid the ambush?" she said. "What if we use it to our advantage?" The team looked at her as if she had suggested jumping off a cliff. Tommy Rodriguez was the first to ask the obvious question. "How do we use an ambush against us to our advantage?" Sarah's plan was audacious and required precise timing. Instead of avoiding the ambush or attacking it directly, she proposed using herself as bait to draw the opposing force out of their prepared positions. While she created a distraction at the ravine entrance, the rest of the team would circle around to attack the ambush positions from behind. "It's too dangerous," Marcus protested. "You'll be completely exposed down there. If something goes wrong, we can't help you." "But if it works, we eliminate the ambush and get through the ravine in half the expected time," Sarah countered. "Sometimes the most dangerous plan is actually the safest because it's the last thing they expect." David Chen studied this proposal from a tactical perspective. It could work, but the timing has to be perfect. Sarah would need to keep them focused on her for at least 10 minutes while we get into position. After considerable debate, the team agreed to attempt Sarah's plan. She would approach the ravine from the expected direction, moving loudly enough to attract attention, but skillfully enough to avoid being eliminated immediately. Meanwhile, Marcus would lead the rest of the team on a wide flanking maneuver to attack the ambush from behind. Sarah's part of the operation required acting skills as much as tactical expertise. She approached the ravine entrance with deliberate clumsiness, making noise, and appearing to be unaware of the danger. The opposing force instructors took the bait immediately, focusing their attention on what appeared to be an easy target walking into their trap. For 8 terrifying minutes, Sarah played a deadly game of cat and mouse in the ravine. She used every piece of cover available, constantly moving to avoid the simulated enemy fire, while making herself visible enough to keep their attention. Blank rounds snapped over her head, and smoke grenades exploded around her position, creating a chaotic environment that tested every survival skill she possessed. Just as the ambush positions began to realize they were being drawn into a trap, Marcus led the flanking attack. The coordination was flawless. While the opposing force instructors were focused on Sarah's position, the rest of Team Charlie struck from their blind spot with devastating effectiveness. The entire ambush was neutralized in less than 2 minutes. Sarah emerged from her concealment position, covered in mud and breathing hard, but grinning with the exhilaration of a plan executed perfectly. The opposing force instructors, despite having been outmaneuvered, showed grudging respect for the tactical innovation they had just witnessed. "Outstanding work," said Master Sergeant Williams, the senior instructor playing the enemy commander. "That was some of the most creative tactical thinking I've seen from recruits in 15 years. You turned our own trap into your advantage." As Team Charlie regrouped and continued toward their rescue objective, the confidence level had shifted dramatically. They were no longer just a group of individuals trying to complete training. They had become a cohesive unit capable of innovative thinking under extreme pressure. Sarah had proven that leadership came in many forms, and that sometimes the smallest person on the team could make the biggest difference. The rescue mission still lay ahead, but they approached it now with the knowledge that they could adapt and overcome any obstacle through teamwork and creative problem-solving. The canyon where the simulated downed pilot waited stretched before Team Charlie like a jagged wound in the earth. Sarah crouched at the rim, studying the terrain through binoculars while her teammates maintained security positions around their observation point. What she saw below made her stomach tighten with concern. The pilot was positioned on a narrow ledge halfway down the canyon wall, approximately 200 feet below their current position, and another 100 feet above the canyon floor. The location was deliberately challenging, requiring technical rope work and precise coordination to reach safely. More troubling were the signs of opposing force activity throughout the canyon. "I count at least 6 enemy positions," Sarah whispered into her radio headset. "2 on the far rim, 3 in the rocks near the canyon floor, and 1 mobile patrol that's been circling the pilot's position every 20 minutes. Marcus studied the scene through his own binoculars. This isn't just a rescue mission, he realized. It's a full-scale tactical problem designed to test every skill we've learned. The team had been making excellent time since defeating the ambush, but now they faced their most complex challenge yet. Other teams were beginning to arrive at the canyon rim, and Sarah could see them taking positions at various points around the perimeter. The competition element was becoming clear. Multiple teams would attempt the rescue simultaneously, and only the most successful would earn top marks for this phase of training. David Chen had been monitoring radio communications and reported disturbing intelligence. 2 teams have already attempted the rescue, he said grimly. Both were eliminated by opposing force fire before they could reach the pilot. The instructors aren't making this easy. Sarah continued her detailed reconnaissance of the canyon, while her teammates developed preliminary assault plans. The conventional approach would involve rappelling down from the rim under covering fire, but the enemy positions were specifically designed to make such direct tactics suicidal. She needed to find an alternative that used their team's unique strengths. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a section of the canyon wall that appeared nearly vertical. "See that crack running down the rock face? It's narrow enough that someone small could climb down without ropes, staying hidden from the enemy positions." Jake Williams looked skeptical. "That's not a crack, Sarah. That's barely a scratch in the rock. Nobody could climb down that without falling." "I could," Sarah said simply. "I've been rock climbing since I was 12. That route would be invisible to the opposing force positions, and it leads directly to the pilot's ledge." The plan that emerged was typically audacious for Team Charlie. While the other teams prepared conventional assault approaches, Sarah would attempt a solo technical climb down the hidden route to reach the pilot. Her teammates would create diversions at multiple points around the canyon rim, drawing enemy attention away from her descent. Tommy Rodriguez voiced the concern they all felt. "If you fall, we can't help you. That climb looks impossible, even for an experienced climber." Sarah checked her climbing gear methodically, items she had requested specifically for this type of situation. The rock is solid granite with good handholds. The route is protected from wind, and the angle is actually more forgiving than it looks from here. "I can do this." Marcus made the final decision with input from the entire team. "We trust your assessment, Sarah, but if anything feels wrong during the climb, abort immediately." The mission isn't worth losing a team member. As Sarah prepared for her descent, the other teams launched their conventional assaults. The canyon erupted in simulated gunfire and smoke grenades as rope teams attempted to reach the pilot from multiple directions. The opposing force responded exactly as Sarah had predicted, concentrating their fire on the obvious threats descending from the rim. Her climb began in complete silence and invisibility. The crack in the rock face was indeed narrow, requiring her to use advanced techniques that relied more on balance and technique than raw strength. Her small size became a tremendous advantage, allowing her to fit into spaces that would have been impossible for larger climbers. Halfway down the cliff face, disaster struck one of the other teams. A rope team from Team Alpha had been caught in crossfire between two enemy positions and was being systematically eliminated. Their distress calls echoed off the canyon walls, adding urgency to Sarah's careful descent. She reached the pilot's ledge without detection, finding Instructor Patterson playing the role of the injured aviator. He looked genuinely surprised to see her approach from an impossible angle. "How the hell did you get here?" he whispered, staying in character as a wounded pilot. "Creative route selection," Sarah replied immediately, beginning her medical assessment as she had been trained. "Can you move under your own power, or do I need to prepare you for assisted evacuation?" The simulated injuries were complex. A broken leg that would require splinting, and a head injury that made rapid movement dangerous. Sarah had anticipated these complications and carried specialized medical equipment for exactly this scenario. As she worked, the sounds of continued combat echoed from around the canyon. "Team Charlie, this is Alpha Leader," came Marcus's voice through her earpiece. "How's your progress down there?" "Package secured and receiving medical treatment," Sarah responded. "Prepare for assisted evacuation to Position 3. Position 3 was a code they had established for an alternative extraction point that avoided the heaviest enemy fire. The evacuation route Sarah had planned required moving along the ledge system to a point where the other teams could provide covering fire for a rope extraction. But as she began moving with the wounded pilot, a new problem emerged. The opposing force had detected her presence and was redirecting fire toward her position. What happened next would become legend among the training instructors at Camp Pendleton. Instead of panicking under fire, Sarah transformed the evacuation into a masterpiece of tactical movement. She used the wounded pilot as motivation to push beyond normal human limits, carrying him when necessary and guiding him through rock formations that provided natural cover. Her route selection was so unpredictable that the opposing force couldn't establish effective firing solutions. She moved sometimes horizontally along ledges, sometimes climbing higher to avoid detected positions, and sometimes descending toward the canyon floor to use terrain features for concealment. 27 minutes after beginning the evacuation, Sarah delivered the pilot to Position 3, where Marcus and David Chen had established a secure extraction point. The entire rescue had been completed while other teams were still attempting to reach the pilot's original position. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been observing the operation from a command post on the canyon rim, called an immediate halt to the exercise. "All teams, cease fire and report to the command post immediately." His voice boomed across the canyon. As Sarah climbed back to the rim with her teammates, she could see the other teams regrouping with varying degrees of success and failure. Some had been completely eliminated. Others had managed partial approaches to the objective, but none had completed the rescue mission. The after-action review was unlike anything the instructors had prepared for. Sarah's approach had been so unconventional that it required a complete reassessment of how they evaluated tactical thinking and mission accomplishment. "Recruit Martinez," Sergeant Rodriguez addressed her directly. "Explain your tactical reasoning for the approach you selected." Sarah's explanation was clear and methodical. She had identified the enemy's expected responses to conventional tactics, analyzed the terrain for alternative approaches that exploited their assumptions, and executed a plan that minimized risk while maximizing speed and stealth. "Outstanding," was Rodriguez's simple response. "You demonstrated tactical innovation under pressure and mission accomplishment against overwhelming odds. This is exactly the kind of thinking we want to develop in our advanced training programs." As Team Charlie gathered their equipment for the return march to base camp, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had proven that success came not from matching expectations, but from exceeding them through preparation, teamwork, and the courage to attempt what others considered impossible. The final phase of Operation Iron Wolf awaited, but Sarah approached it now with complete confidence in her abilities and her team. They had become something special during these 3 days in the field, and tomorrow would bring the ultimate test of everything they had learned together. Colonel James Mitchell stepped out of his staff car at Camp Pendleton with the bearing of a man who had seen combat in 3 different war zones. His arrival was unannounced and unexpected, creating a ripple of nervous energy throughout the training facility. Word spread quickly among the instructors that the base's commanding officer had come to personally observe the final phase of Operation Iron Wolf. Sarah Martinez had never seen so much activity on a military base. Senior instructors, who usually displayed unshakable calm, were suddenly checking equipment, reviewing procedures, and ensuring every detail met the highest standards. She watched from her team's assembly area as vehicles arrived carrying additional observers and evaluation personnel. "What's got everyone so worked up?" Tommy Rodriguez asked, noting the unusual level of activity around the command post. David Chen, who had been talking to some of the other recruits, returned with disturbing intelligence. "Apparently, Colonel Mitchell doesn't just run this base," he explained in hushed tones. "He's also the selection authority for the Navy SEAL training program. Word is, he's here to personally evaluate recruits for potential advancement to special operations training." The implications hit Team Charlie immediately. This final exercise wasn't just about completing their current training program. It was about determining who would have opportunities for the military's most elite units. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but not from nervousness. This was the opportunity she had dreamed about since deciding to join the military. Colonel Mitchell's reputation preceded him throughout the base. He was known as a leader who valued innovation over convention, results over politics, and courage over caution. Stories circulated about his own military career, successful special operations missions that had been classified for years, leadership decisions that had saved entire units, and a promotion record that reflected consistent excellence under impossible conditions. Sergeant Rodriguez gathered Team Charlie for a final briefing before the exercise began. His demeanor was more serious than they had ever seen, and his words carried weight that made everyone listen carefully. "The final phase is called Last Stand," he explained. "You'll be defending a strategic position against overwhelming enemy forces. The scenario is designed to test leadership under extreme pressure, tactical innovation when conventional methods fail, and the ability to inspire others when defeat seems certain." Sarah studied the tactical map Rodriguez provided, noting immediately that the defensive position was nearly indefensible by traditional military doctrine. The high ground advantage was minimal. Escape routes were limited, and the enemy would have superior numbers and firepower. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that separated exceptional leaders from merely competent ones. "Teams will be evaluated not just on their tactical performance," Rodriguez continued, "but on their ability to adapt when plans fail, maintain unit cohesion under stress, and demonstrate the kind of leadership qualities we look for in special operations candidates." As the teams moved toward their starting positions, Sarah noticed Colonel Mitchell establishing an observation post that would give him clear views of all defensive positions. He was accompanied by several other senior officers she didn't recognize, but whose bearings suggested they represented different branches of special operations. The defensive position assigned to Team Charlie was particularly challenging. A partially destroyed building complex that offered some cover, but had multiple breach points that would be difficult to defend simultaneously. Sarah quickly realized that conventional defensive tactics would fail within minutes against the opposing force that was being assembled. "They're not just testing our ability to follow doctrine," she told her teammates as they established their initial positions. "They want to see if we can innovate when doctrine isn't sufficient." Marcus, who had fully embraced collaborative leadership, asked for Sarah's tactical assessment of their situation. Her analysis was sobering but thorough. "We can't defend all these positions with 5 people," she concluded. "But we don't have to. We just need to convince the enemy that we can." The plan she proposed was psychological warfare combined with tactical deception. Instead of spreading their forces thin, trying to defend multiple breach points, they would create the illusion of a larger defensive force through movement, noise discipline, and carefully timed engagements that made the enemy believe they faced superior numbers. "It's risky," David Chen observed. "If they figure out what we're doing, they'll overwhelm us quickly." "But if it works," Jake Williams added, "we could hold this position indefinitely, while other teams with better defensive positions fall to conventional attacks." The exercise began with artillery simulation that shook the ground and filled the air with smoke and confusion. Sarah's team immediately implemented their deception plan, with each member moving between multiple positions to create the impression of a full platoon rather than a 5-person team. From his observation post, Colonel Mitchell watched with growing interest as Team Charlie's defensive strategy unfolded. Other teams were fighting conventionally and being systematically eliminated, but Charlie's position seemed to be repelling attacks with impossible effectiveness. "Who's commanding that position?" he asked Sergeant Rodriguez, pointing toward Team Charlie's building complex. "Team Charlie, sir. They've been the standout performers throughout Operation Iron Wolf." "Who's their team leader?" Rodriguez consulted his notes. "Officially, Marcus Thompson from Alabama, but in practice, they've been operating as a collaborative unit with significant tactical input from Recruit Martinez." "Martinez?" The colonel's eyebrows raised. "The small woman I saw in the initial reports?" "Yes, sir. She's been the tactical innovator behind most of their successful operations during this exercise." Colonel Mitchell raised his binoculars and focused on Team Charlie's position. What he observed over the next 30 minutes challenged every assumption he had made about leadership and tactical effectiveness. The defensive strategy being employed was sophisticated beyond what he expected from recruits, and the execution was flawless. Sarah had positioned herself at the central coordination point, managing the deception by directing her teammates' movements with hand signals and whispered radio communications. Each team member rotated through multiple fighting positions, firing from different locations to simulate a much larger force. The timing was so precise that the opposing force believed they were engaging a full squad rather than 5 individuals. The breakthrough moment came when the opposing force attempted a coordinated assault from 3 directions simultaneously. Traditional defensive doctrine would have required splitting forces to meet each threat, inevitably leading to defeat. Instead, Sarah implemented something completely unexpected. Rather than defending all 3 breach points, Team Charlie abandoned 2 positions entirely and concentrated their full firepower on the single most dangerous approach. They repelled that attack decisively, then immediately moved to the 2nd position before the enemy could exploit the temporarily abandoned areas. By the time the opposing force reorganized for a second assault, Team Charlie had repositioned again, creating confusion about the actual size and capabilities of the defending force. "That's remarkable tactical thinking," Colonel Mitchell murmured, watching the maneuver through his binoculars. "She's using mobility and timing to multiply her force effectiveness. Where did she learn tactics like that?" Sergeant Rodriguez was equally impressed. "I don't think she learned it anywhere, sir. I think she's developing it in real time based on the tactical situation." The exercise continued for 2 hours, with Team Charlie successfully repelling 7 separate assault attempts. Other defensive positions had fallen one by one, until only Charlie remained active. The opposing force, frustrated by their inability to overwhelm what they believed was a superior defensive position, began committing larger forces to eliminate the final holdout. This escalation played directly into Sarah's overall strategy. As more opposing force units concentrated on Team Charlie's position, she realized they had created an opportunity for a counterattack that could end the exercise decisively. The plan she proposed to her teammates was audacious, even by their standards. "They've committed almost their entire force to eliminating us," she explained quickly during a brief lull in the fighting. "Their command post is probably only lightly defended now. If we can break out and strike their headquarters, we can turn this from a defensive exercise into an offensive victory." Marcus looked at her, as if she had suggested flying to the moon. "Break out? Sarah, we're completely surrounded, and even if we could get out, attacking their command post with 5 people is suicide." "Not if they don't expect it," Sarah replied. "They think we're pinned down and desperate. They won't be watching for an aggressive breakout, and their command post security will be minimal because they've committed everyone to the assault." The debate was intense but brief. David Chen supported the plan, recognizing its tactical merit despite the risks. Jake Williams was concerned about the logistics of moving undetected through enemy territory. Tommy Rodriguez worried about abandoning their successful defensive position. From his observation post, Colonel Mitchell watched Team Charlie's defensive fire suddenly cease. For several minutes, there was no activity from their position, leading the opposing force to believe they had finally been eliminated. The assault teams began moving forward to secure the building complex. What happened next would be discussed in military tactical schools for years afterward. Team Charlie emerged from their defensive position through a route that no one had considered, a drainage tunnel that connected to a storm system running beneath the entire exercise area. Sarah had identified this escape route during her initial reconnaissance, but had kept it in reserve for exactly this type of desperate situation. The breakout was executed with precision that impressed even the opposing force instructors. While enemy units focused on clearing the building complex they believed contained defeated defenders, Team Charlie moved through underground passages toward the command post location. Colonel Mitchell followed their progress through radio reports from exercise controllers who were tracking their movement. "They're attempting something I've never seen recruits try," he told his observation team. "This level of tactical innovation is remarkable." The attack on the opposing force command post came without warning. Sarah led the assault personally, using the same climbing skills that had served her during the rescue mission to approach from an unexpected angle. The command post security, confident that all threats were contained in the main battle area, was completely unprepared for a coordinated attack from their rear. Team Charlie eliminated the command post staff in less than 3 minutes, capturing the communication equipment and effectively ending the exercise with a complete tactical victory. The opposing force units, suddenly cut off from command and control, found themselves in an impossible position. Colonel Mitchell called an immediate halt to the exercise. "All units, cease fire and report to the main assembly area immediately." His voice carried a tone of amazement that made everyone understand they had witnessed something extraordinary. As the teams gathered for the after-action review, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had not only survived the impossible defensive scenario, but had turned it into an offensive victory that exceeded every expectation. Colonel Mitchell approached Team Charlie directly, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "Recruit Martinez," he said, looking directly at Sarah. "I need to speak with you privately after this review." What you accomplished today raises some interesting questions about advanced training opportunities. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized that her performance had been noticed at the highest levels. The final evaluation was about to begin, and everything she had worked toward was within reach. Tomorrow would bring decisions that could change the entire trajectory of her military career. The officers' briefing room at Camp Pendleton had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Colonel Mitchell sat at the head of a conference table, surrounded by senior representatives from Navy Special Warfare Command, Army Special Operations, Marine Force Reconnaissance, and Air Force Pararescue. The topic of discussion was a 22-year-old recruit from Texas who had just redefined their understanding of tactical leadership. Sarah Martinez waited outside the briefing room, still in her field uniform and gear from the completed exercise. Through the thick wooden door, she could hear the murmur of serious conversation, but couldn't make out individual words. Her teammates from Team Charlie sat nearby, equally uncertain about what this unprecedented meeting meant for their futures. Inside the room, Colonel Mitchell was presenting his assessment to officers who had collectively overseen thousands of special operations selections. Gentlemen, in 30 years of military service, I have never observed a recruit demonstrate this level of tactical innovation under pressure. The performance metrics from Operation Iron Wolf are unlike anything in our databases. Commander Sarah Walsh from Navy Special Warfare leaned forward, studying the performance report spread across the table. These numbers seem almost impossible. She outperformed Navy SEAL candidates with years more experience and training. How do we verify that this wasn't an anomaly? By testing her against our best, replied Colonel Mitchell. I want to arrange a direct comparison exercise. Put her head-to-head with a team of experienced Navy SEALs and see how she performs. The room fell silent. What the colonel was proposing was unprecedented in military training history. Recruits simply didn't compete directly against elite special operations personnel. The skill gap was considered insurmountable, the experience differential too vast to make meaningful comparisons. Major Davis from Army Special Operations voiced the concern everyone felt. Sir, with all due respect, that seems like setting her up for failure. Our operators have years of advanced training and combat experience. It wouldn't be a fair comparison. Colonel Mitchell's response carried the weight of absolute conviction. Major, fairness isn't the objective here. We need to understand the upper limits of her capabilities. If she's going to be fast-tracked into special operations training, we need to know exactly what we're working with. The decision was made within the hour. Sarah would face a direct comparison exercise against a team of Navy SEALs scheduled to arrive at Camp Pendleton the following week for advanced training. The scenario would be carefully controlled, but completely realistic, designed to test every aspect of tactical leadership and operational effectiveness. When Sarah was finally called into the briefing room, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. Colonel Mitchell addressed her directly, his tone respectful but serious. Recruit Martinez, your performance during Operation Iron Wolf has attracted attention at the highest levels of military special operations. We're prepared to offer you an unprecedented opportunity. Sarah listened as the colonel explained the proposed comparison exercise. She would lead a team of volunteers from her current training class against a team of experienced Navy SEALs in a complex tactical scenario. The exercise would be observed by senior officers from across the special operations community and would influence decisions about advanced training opportunities. I won't lie to you, Colonel Mitchell continued. This is an enormous challenge. The SEALs you'll be facing are among the best operators in the world. They have years of experience, advanced training, and combat experience that you lack. Most military experts would say you have no chance of success. Sarah met his gaze steadily. What's the scenario, sir? Urban hostage rescue, multiple buildings, civilian complications. Unknown number of hostiles. Both teams will attempt the same mission simultaneously using different approaches. Success will be measured by mission completion time, hostage casualties, and tactical efficiency. The week that followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Word of the upcoming exercise spread throughout the base, creating an atmosphere of intense anticipation. Some instructors were skeptical that a recruit could compete against Navy SEALs. Others were genuinely curious to see if Sarah's tactical innovations would translate to elite-level competition. Sarah spent the preparation time studying urban warfare tactics and refining her team selection. She chose Marcus Thompson, David Chen, Jake Williams, and Tommy Rodriguez, the teammates who had proven they could execute complex plans under extreme pressure. Together, they analyzed building layouts, practiced close-quarters combat techniques, and developed contingency plans for every scenario they could imagine. The Navy SEAL team arrived 3 days before the exercise, led by Lieutenant Commander Rick Sullivan, a veteran operator with 15 years of special operations experience. His team consisted of seasoned professionals who had completed multiple combat deployments and represented the absolute pinnacle of military training and experience. The contrast between the two teams was stark. The SEALs moved with the confidence of operators who had faced real combat situations. Their equipment was state-of-the-art, their techniques polished through years of refinement, and their teamwork developed through countless missions together. Sarah's team, by comparison, looked like exactly what they were: recruits with 3 weeks of training and borrowed equipment. On the morning of the exercise, both teams received identical briefings about the hostage situation. 3 buildings in a mock urban environment contained an unknown number of hostages, guarded by opposing force instructors playing terrorist roles. The mission required clearing all buildings, securing all hostages, and neutralizing all threats within a strict time limit. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan's team approached the problem with textbook special operations methodology. They established overwatch positions, conducted detailed reconnaissance, and prepared for a coordinated assault using proven techniques that had been successful in real-world operations. Sarah's approach was characteristically unconventional. Instead of focusing primarily on the tactical challenge, she spent considerable time analyzing the psychological aspects of the scenario. She realized that the opposing force instructors playing terrorist roles would expect conventional special operations tactics and would have prepared accordingly. "They're expecting us to come through windows and doors," she explained to her team during their final planning session. "They've probably prepared defenses for exactly the kind of assault the SEALs will execute. We need to find approaches they haven't considered." Her plan involved using the urban environment's infrastructure in ways that conventional tactics didn't consider. Utility tunnels, maintenance passages, and architectural features that weren't included in standard building diagrams became integral parts of her approach strategy. The exercise began with both teams launching their operations simultaneously from opposite ends of the urban complex. Colonel Mitchell and his observation team monitored both approaches through advanced surveillance equipment that tracked every movement and tactical decision. The SEAL team's execution was flawless by conventional standards. They moved with precision, communicated efficiently, and began clearing buildings using techniques that had been proven in combat operations around the world. Their progress was steady and professional, exactly what observers expected from elite operators. Sarah's team took an entirely different approach. Instead of engaging the buildings directly, they spent the first 20 minutes infiltrating the urban complex through infrastructure that the opposing force hadn't considered in their defensive planning. When they finally began their assault, it came from directions that caught the defenders completely off guard. The results were dramatic and immediate. While the SEAL team fought through prepared defensive positions, Sarah's team eliminated threats before the defenders could organize effective resistance. Her approach was so unexpected that opposing force instructors found themselves eliminated before they understood what was happening. The final statistics would be analyzed for months afterward. Sarah's team completed the mission in 43 minutes with 0 hostage casualties and 100% threat neutralization. The SEAL team, despite flawless execution of conventional tactics, required 67 minutes and sustained 2 hostage casualties due to the prepared defensive positions they encountered. Colonel Mitchell's assessment was delivered to a room full of silent senior officers. Gentlemen, we have just witnessed something unprecedented in special operations training. A recruit with 3 weeks of training has outperformed a team of experienced Navy SEALs using tactical innovation that challenges our fundamental assumptions about special operations methodology. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan, to his enormous credit, was the first to acknowledge what had occurred. That was remarkable tactical thinking, he told Sarah after the exercise concluded. You approached problems we've been solving the same way for years and found completely new solutions. That's the kind of innovation that saves lives in real operations. The meeting that followed would determine Sarah's future in ways she couldn't have imagined. The assembled officers spent hours debating the implications of what they had witnessed and developing recommendations that would reach the highest levels of military command. 3 days later, Sarah received orders that would change her life forever. She was being fast-tracked directly into Navy SEAL training, bypassing traditional selection processes and multiple levels of preparatory programs. The orders were signed by officials whose names she recognized from newspaper headlines and military history books. As she prepared to leave Camp Pendleton for her new assignment, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had arrived 3 weeks earlier as an underestimated recruit whom everyone expected to fail quickly. She was leaving as someone who had redefined what was possible through determination, innovation, and the refusal to accept limitations that others tried to impose. The doubters had been silenced, the expectations exceeded, and the impossible made real. But for Sarah Martinez, this was just the beginning. The real challenges lay ahead, and she approached them with the same confidence that had carried her through every obstacle so far. Some barriers were meant to be broken, and she had proven she was exactly the person to break. In the heart of Sarah Martinez's extraordinary journey, from an underestimated 22-year-old recruit stepping off a bus at Camp Pendleton, to outmaneuvering seasoned Navy SEALs in grueling tactical exercises, lies a profound life lesson that resonates deeply with all of us. True strength isn't defined by size, appearance, or the doubts of others, but by unyielding determination, innovative thinking, and the courage to defy expectations. Sarah, standing at just 5'4", and facing smirks from towering male counterparts who whispered she'd never last, didn't just survive, she thrived. She turned her perceived weaknesses into advantages, using her agility for stealthy climbs, her sharp mind for audacious plans that flipped ambushes on their heads, and her quiet resolve to forge unbreakable team bonds. Imagine the raw emotion of proving naysayers wrong, not through brute force, but through heart-pounding moments of ingenuity, like baiting enemies in a ravine or scaling impossible cliffs under fire. Her story tugs at our souls because it mirrors our own battles, the job rejections, the societal judgments, the inner voices whispering, "You're not enough." Yet, Sarah teaches us that when we embrace our unique strengths and refuse to quit, we can shatter barriers and inspire those around us. In real life, this means pushing through failures with grit, innovating in the face of adversity, and building alliances that multiply our power. It's a reminder that heroes aren't born from perfection, but from perseverance, turning impossible into triumph. If Sarah's tale moved you, as it did me, evoking tears of inspiration and fists of empowerment, let's keep the conversation going. Share in the comments below. What's a time you overcame doubt and surprised everyone, including yourself? Your stories could motivate others. And if you want more uplifting mission tales like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're just getting started on journeys that prove anyone can rise above. Together, let's celebrate the underdogs who change the world.